Keith Richards, the human riff, the very soul of the Rolling Stones. For more than 60 years, he's been the living, breathing embodiment of rock and roll's defiant spirit. This is the man who conjured the riffs that are now part of music's DNA, from the opening snarl of Jumpin' Jack Flash to the pure swagger of honky-tonk women. He's the roll to Jagger's rock, the anchor grounding the colossal machinery of the Stones in the truth of the blues. But what does a man like this, a legend who has outlasted nearly everyone, actually listen to? What bands does the ultimate rock and roll outlaw truly respect? This isn't just some list. It's a map to his musical soul. We've sifted through decades of interviews, his autobiography, Life, and countless other sources to find the 8 bands that Keith Richards himself has called his absolute favorites. This isn't about who sold the most records or won the most awards. This is about the sounds that shaped him and the musicians who earned his ultimate respect. Might see some of them coming, but a few will definitely catch you by surprise. What emerges is a blueprint for authenticity, and a look into what really matters to one of music's most vital figures. Keith Richards' musical awakening didn't happen in some smoky London club. It came through a radio broadcast that sounded like a message from another world. And at the center of it wasn't just a singer, but a band. Before Elvis Presley was crowned the king, he was part of a raw, revolutionary quartet sometimes billed as the Hillbilly Cats, with Scotty Moore on guitar, Bill Black on bass, and later DJ Fontana on drums. For a young Keith, hearing them was a biblical event. He famously said the experience was like the world went from black and white to Technicolor. It wasn't just a new sound. It was a new reality. Richards has often made it clear that his obsession was with the whole unit, not just the guy out front. "I was just as interested in the band as I was in Elvis," he explained. "I just considered him to be part of it." Bill Black, Scotty Moore, and DJ Fontana. This is a critical point. While the world was mesmerized by Elvis's sneer, Keith was listening closer, dissecting the sound. He heard the raw, unvarnished energy of a few guys in a room, capturing lightning in a bottle. The real revelation for Richards was Scotty Moore's guitar. It was a language he'd been waiting his whole life to hear. Hearing tracks like Heartbreak Hotel was life-changing. In his book, Life, Richards recalled the shock. "It just hit me. That rhythm, that looseness. It was everything I'd been waiting to hear." Moore wasn't a flashy player. He was an artist of feel, using slapback echo and a finger-picking style that sounded both futuristic and ancient. For Keith, Moore's playing on those early Sun records was the future. What Keith loved in the Hillbilly Cats was their perfection in imperfection. They weren't polished, they were alive. He praised the raw recording process that captured their true essence. The thing is that Elvis and the boys, the band, had a sound which they'd worked on, honed down, and perfected. He explained, he believed. All you had to do was put them in a room with a couple of mics to get the sound they intended to make. For Richards, the Hillbilly Cats were the blueprint, a self-contained unit with a unique identity. It's built on instinct, rhythm, and pure chemistry. They weren't just Elvis's backup band. They were the engine that set the world on fire. If Elvis's band was the bolt of lightning, the next band on Keith's list is the funky, sophisticated engine room. We travel from Memphis down to the rhythmic heart of New Orleans, home of the Dave Bartholomew Band. Their name might not be as famous as others, but their sound is foundational. This was the house band for Imperial Records, the incredible group that backed legends like Fats Domino and Little Richard. And in doing so, they basically wrote the book on the rock and roll beat. Keith Richards, a lifelong student of the groove, consistently names this band as a key part of his musical education. At the same time as Elvis Band, then Dave Bartholomew's band that backed up Little Richard, Fats Domino. That was a great band, he stated with conviction. Its admiration comes from a deep respect for the art of the rhythm section. While the Hillbilly Cats had a wild energy, Bartholomew's band had a masterful blend of wildness and control. Bartholomew, a trumpeter and brilliant arranger, was the leader, but the band was full of giants, like the legendary Earl Palmer on drums. They created what became known as the Big Beat, a heavy rolling rhythm that was impossible not to dance to. For Richards, whose career was built on the groove he shared with Charlie Watts, the telepathy of a band like this was the ultimate aspiration. He admired their ability to be both tight and loose, noting, "It's not just about keeping time. About how you play around it, ... Those guys were pros. They could play anything and make it cook. Their sound is all over the Stones' DNA, providing the rhythmic groundwork for countless bands that followed. In Keith's world, where feel is everything." The Dave Bartholomew Band were the master architects of the role in rock and roll, from the foundational grooves of New Orleans. We moved to a band that taught Keith a different lesson. Rock and roll could be theater. The Coasters, known for their funny, story-driven hits of the late 1950s, might seem like a novelty act to some, but to Keith Richards, they were much more. He saw past the humor to the brilliant craftsmanship. The Coasters weren't just making records, they were creating 3-minute plays set to an irresistible beat. Richards has always defended their artistic merit. "They were sly," he told Rolling Stone. "People thought they were just funny songs, but the grooves were tight and the playing was clever." Songs like Yak de Yak and Poison Ivy were vivid vignettes. This was a revelation. In his autobiography, he wrote with admiration, "The Coasters were doing stories. They had characters, they had drama. We learned a lot from that." This focus on narrative became a subtle but key part of the Stones' own work. Many of their best songs are character studies. From the bored housewife in Mother's Little Helper to the street-fighting man himself, this approach owes a quiet debt to the templates set by the Coasters. "We weren't just copying the blues," he said. "We were copying everything that had energy." The Coasters had that swagger. They also proved that rock and roll didn't have to be so serious to be powerful. "They made you laugh, but they could groove like hell," he told NPR's Terry. Gross. That's a hard trick to pull off. This blend of wit and rhythm resonated with Keith's own style. By honoring the Coasters, he's paying tribute to the art of the rock and roll narrative. Celebrating a band that knew a great song needs more than a great riff, needs a great story. In the mid-1960s, Keith's attention turned to a band from Knee, his own backyard, one that embodied the raw power of British rock. For Keith, one voice often rose above the rest: Steve Marriott, the frontman of the Small Faces and later Humble Pie. When Keith Richards talks about the best bands, he often bypasses bigger names to land on his admiration for Marriott. In a 2008 interview, Richards was asked to name the all-time greatest bands. "I always liked Steve Marriott, very much from the English point of view," he said, before adding, "I'm not going to say like Led Zeppelin, The Who, Black Sabbath. I would only be lying, not my favorites." What set Marriott apart? For Keith, it was authenticity. Richards felt that, with bands like Zeppelin and The Who, you could always see the joint where the parts were stitched together. With Marriott, it was seamless. "People go on about Zeppelin and The Who," Richards wrote in his book, "but for me, it was Marriott. Every time. He could sing those blokes under the table." This wasn't just about vocal talent, it was about the type of talent. Marriott's voice was raw and emotional, never acrobatic, a critique Richards has aimed at others. He mourned Marriott's early death, telling the Quietus, "I loved Stevie Marriott. He was one I hoped would stick around for a while. What a great voice and guitar player." The two were friends, and Marriott confirmed it, once saying, "The only people I keep in touch with are Keith Richards and people like that." At one point, Marriott was even in the running to replace Mick Taylor in the Stones and was reportedly Richards' top choice. However, the audition didn't pan out, allegedly because Mick Jagger felt upstaged. Ultimately, what Keith saw in the Small Faces was a reflection of his own values. a dedication to the song and a deep connection to the blues. For Keith, Steve Marriott wasn't just a great singer. He was the genuine article. We're halfway through our trip into the musical mind of Keith Richards. His choices show a deep love for rhythm, storytelling, and raw authenticity. If you're enjoying this, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets us keep making more stories like this one. Now, back to the list. Because the next band is the one everyone asks about. You can't talk about the Rolling Stones without talking about the Beatles. And Keith's list of favorites wouldn't be complete without them. For years, the media pushed a story of a bitter rivalry, the clean-cut mop-tops versus the scruffy bad boys. The truth, as Richards has often said, was more about mutual respect. The Beatles and the Stones have been basically joined together at the hips from the beginning. Richards said, "We were totally different bands, but we knew each other well." His admiration starts with their songwriting. Despite his famous dismissal of SGT, Pepper as a mishmash of rubbish, his respect for the Lennon-McCartney partnership is absolute. "You can't knock the songs," he admitted. "I mean, Lennon and McCartney, that's the real deal." This praise comes from a fellow master of the craft. He saw how their creative fire pushed the Rolling Stones to evolve. If they hadn't kicked the door in, there wouldn't be a way through the door, Key said. In the early days, their relationship was more collaborative than competitive. John and Paul famously gave the Stones one of their first hits, "I Wanna Be Your Man." Later, they sang, back up on the Stones track, "We Love You." This was a bond forged in the insane fires of 1960s fame. Richards explained, "We were the only ones that knew what it's like to have that extreme kind of fame in the 1960s. So that created a bond." Of course, Keith being Keith, his praise comes with sharp critique. He saw a key difference in their structures. The Beatles were basically a vocal band, he observed. They all sang. Our band set up totally differently with one frontman. He also felt their true power was in the studio. Musically, the Beatles had a lovely sound and great songs. He said, but the live thing? They were never quite there. This isn't an insult, but an honest take from a man who believes a band proves itself on stage. For Richards, the Beatles were brilliant pop architects and essential rivals who, by setting the bar so high, forced the Stones to reach for their own greatness. If the Beatles were brilliant peers, if there is one group that Keith Richards seems to hold up as a sacred ideal, the band. The Canadian-American quintet represented a musical utopia for him, seamless, egoless collective where the music was everything. When he talks about the band, it's with a reverence that's almost spiritual. "Those guys were like a jukebox of all-American music," Richards told Uncut Magazine. Amazed at their ability to blend blues, country, and gospel. His admiration was about their philosophy. No big egos. No one up front saying, "Look at me." It was about the music, not the personalities, he said in an interview. This was the opposite of the Jagger-Richards dynamic. The band had multiple lead singers, Levin Helm, Rick Danko, and Richard Manuel, who traded vocals with effortless grace. There was no single frontman, only the song. Richards was especially captivated by drummer and vocalist Levin Helm. "Levin was a soul man," he said. "A drummer who could sing like that? That's rare." But it was the group's synergy that truly mesmerized him. In his book, he describes their music as a compass. During the turbulent 1970s, "If I ever felt the Stones were drifting too far from what mattered," he wrote, "I'd put on the band and remember why we started in the first place." For Keith, at the height of the Stones' fame, it was the earthy, honest music of the band that brought him back to center. Their music wasn't about individual heroics. It was about the weave, a concept central to Richards' own guitar philosophy. It was about listening and serving the song above all else. In a world of rock star theatrics, the band was a monument to collective artistry. For Keith Richards, they weren't just a great band. They were a lesson and a beautiful, unattainable ideal. Keith Richards is drawn to music with a deep groove and a sense of danger, so it's no surprise he fell hard for reggae. In that world, one band stands supreme. The Wailers, the formidable force behind Bob Marley. Richards' admiration for them is profound. Rooted in his time in Jamaica in the 1970s, where he absorbed the island's sound and culture, his praise is often visceral. He famously called them the most dangerous live band he ever saw. This danger wasn't about theatrics. It was about the sheer, locked-in intensity of their performance. Saw a rhythmic discipline that most rock bands couldn't touch. In a GQ interview, he praised the legendary rhythm section of Aston family man Barrett on bass and his brother Carlton on drums. Those two locked in like no one else. It was like a heartbeat, Richards explained. Most rock bands couldn't get close to that kind of groove. He saw them rehearse in Kingston and was mesmerized by their control. They weren't flashy, he recalled. They just built a wave and rode it. That's discipline. This idea of disciplined power is central to Keith's musical worldview. He saw the same qualities he admired in the band, a collective where every member had a role and no one was grandstanding. Everyone had a job, no one was showing off. That's how you make a band work, he told Mojo. His love for reggae was a deep musical immersion. And it bled into the Stones' own music on albums like Goat's Head Soup and Black and Blue. He was drawn to reggae when he felt American music was dominated by disco, which he found less interesting. Reggae was the alternative, raw, spiritual, and possessing a rhythmic sophistication that captivated him. For Keith, the Wailers were the ultimate expression of that power. In the world of rock that came after the British invasion, few bands have earned Keith's unqualified respect. He's famously dismissed many hard rock and heavy metal acts as contrived. But there is one thunderous exception, AC/DC. Richards' admiration for the Australian rockers is built on his shared philosophy. The riff is king. Millions are in love. With Metallic and Black Sabbath, he said in a 2015 interview, "I just thought they were great jokes." Yet, he's always spoken of AC/DC with real affection, calling them a great little bungle of energy. He respects their purity and their refusal to chase trends. They're like Chuck Berry with a heavier amp, he once joked, which in Keith's world is the highest praise. A key part of his admiration is for the guitar duo of brothers Angus and Malcolm. Young, much like his own ancient art of weaving with his fellow guitarists, he saw magic in their interplay. There are bands where you can't tell who's doing what. But Angus and Malcolm, you know exactly, he explained. Angus shreds the leads, Malcolm holds the foundation. Their tightness is unreal. He famously jammed with them in Germany in 2003 and spoke glowingly of the experience. Interestingly, Angus Young revealed that Keith's favorite AC/DC album isn't one of their massive sellers like Back in Black, but the 1978 album, Powerage. According to Angus, Keith listened to it once and immediately said, "Put it on again." The choice makes perfect sense. Powerage is considered by many fans to be their rawest, most blues-drenched album. All qualities Keith cherishes. In a world of changing fashions, AC/DC stayed loyal to the riff. Because of that, Keith Richards sees them as brothers in arms. So, there you have it, the 8 bands that define the musical soul of Keith Richards. From the Technicolor blast of Elvis's Hillbilly Cats to the unshakable riffs of AC/DC, a clear pattern emerges. This isn't a list about fame or complexity. It's a testament to Keith's core beliefs. He values the band over the individual, to groove over the solo, and authenticity over everything. He champions the unsung heroes, the New Orleans funk of KU. The Dave Bartholomew Band. The storytelling of the Coaster Zan celebrates the raw power of voices. Like Steve Marriott's, he finds an ideal in the unity of the band and respects the dangerous rhythm of the Wailers. And in the Beatles, he sees the brilliant rivals who pushed the Stones to become legends. What do all these bands share? They were, in his eyes, real bands. Groups of musicians locked in together, serving this song and creating a sound that was honest, powerful, and alive. They are the artists who taught him about rhythm, soul, and the sacred chemistry that happens when a few people plug in and play from the heart. They aren't just his favorite bands. They are the pillars of his musical worldview. They are the role in his rock and roll. Now we want to turn it over to you. What band do you think is missing from Keith's list? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the minds of music's greatest icons, make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching.